You're listening to The Builder's Mindset with Mike DiGiovanni, presented by Amazing Mindsets.
Hello. Welcome back to another episode of The Builder's Mindset. You know, I'm not going to promise, but I'm going to say I'm going to try to have a shorter episode this week. Why? I don't know. I think it'd be nice to try to do one under 15 minutes. That was originally my goal when I started these, and I'll have to ask. I'll have to go back and look and see like what was the average length and how many were below 15 minutes. But we're gonna do a quick one right now because I think we're in for some interesting times, and I just want to talk really quickly about when costs do not track with revenues. Houston, I think we may have a problem. Don't mistake that for pessimism from the mindset, from the builder's mindset. What I am saying is, I got into this industry in 2005, before the Great Recession, and I had a few good years before that Great Recession came, enough to get my feet under me, learn about the industry enough, and to have a project that in 2009/10, I rebid that project 3 times. Rebid it. So I bid it, and then I went out and renumbered it, and renumbered it. So if you count the initial bid, it was bid 4 times, and each time the cost came down. In that window of time, if anybody remembers, if you've been around, in 2009, 8, 9, 10, we had the housing market crash, which kind of led us into the Great Recession. And so everything was coming down, right? Labor costs were coming down, material costs in the home building industry were coming down. I mean, it was so major, so massive, and so impactful that everything was coming down. So you could go out and rebid. And at the same time, revenues were coming down as well. Now, let's flip that around to my first 2 years in the industry, 2005 to 2007. I guess, actually, I started in the industry late 2004. So let's call it like full 2005, 2006. But really in 2005, it was just gangbusters. And I remember calling up one of my colleagues in another market. I was in the Florida market at the time. And there were, the builder I was working for at the time, we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think we had 6 or 7 divisions in the state of Florida. And I remember calling one of them up, and I was like, man, I'm really nervous. He's like, what? I'm like, I get price increases left and right from these trade partners, here, there, blah. And he goes, how much have your costs gone up in the last 90 days? And I said, I think it was 5 to 7% in that last 90 days alone. And he goes, and how much has the sell price of your homes on average gone up in the last 90 days? I was like, I don't know, at least 15. He goes, you're fine. Okay, so what did he mean by that? He's like, oh, you're fine. Your costs are up 5 to 7%. Your sell price is up 15%. We more than covered the cost of our price increases with our revenues. So in those 2 examples, running up to the recession, costs were going crazy. We were building houses like nutso, and revenues were going like insane. This was back in the day when like you'd release a new phase of homes for sale and people would line up to buy them. Like, you know, there was the running joke was your cab driver and your hairdresser or your barber were buying houses and then flipping them. And so it was a recipe for disaster. But the revenues were rising faster than the costs. So from a cost perspective, as a protector of cost and protector of profits, even though my costs were going up, I was good because they were tracking in a positive way for the company I worked for and the industry as a whole with the revenues. Like, okay, so it was good. Then same thing as we're going through like 2009, 2010, 2011, it was the opposite thing, but still we were tracking together. We were trying to get costs down, revenues were dropping. And so it wasn't fun, it wasn't like enjoyable, but they were tracking together. I think we are headed for some interesting times. And not because of tariffs, but those will potentially exacerbate the situation. I have not heard of any real substantial cost of material decreases. And so I know that trade partners, a lot of them, and I just did a webinar session with my good friend Michelle Skeldon, and we did a thing for trade partners navigating price increases. The fact that there was interest for that and people wanted to participate in that tells me that the vast majority of trade partners feel like they need to raise their pricing right now. Okay. But they don't know how they can, or they don't feel good about it. Some of it's tariff driven. Some of it's just generally like materials are not going down. They've watched their margins erode just like builders' margins have eroded. And builders' margins are going to continue to erode. As we said in our couple weeks ago in the Q1 earnings preview, where we talked about Lennar Toll, KOB, and KB, all of their margins Q1 25 versus Q1 of 24 down. Builders are feeling the margin compression pinch right now, and so they are trying to get costs to come down because they are not experiencing revenue growth, and quite the contrary, in some instances are having to reduce pricing to maintain the pace that they need for that given community, and they're still heavily incentivizing buyers to stick around after they show up. Traffic is good, conversions are kind of weak right now, but there's the only where to give on costs, in my opinion, is in the labor. Excuse me. And I've said this, I'm not a fan of that. I believe when we start reducing labor rates, essentially, I don't care how you slice and dice it, when you reduce labor rates, you're basically giving somebody like a cut in pay, right? And I'm not a big fan of that. I think from just all kinds of levels, a personal level overall for those people and their families, but also because, look, being a tradesman is like, it's one of the last places where you can go without a college degree and make a good living. And home building is built on tradesmen. There's other tradesmen outside of home building, but I truly believe that if you're in entry-level markets, some of the trades, definitely the foreman, in my opinion, should be able to have a shot if they're good with their finances of owning a home in your community. Whether they do or not, that's up to you. And I think if you're not an entry-level builder, I still think that your tradesmen, particularly, like I said, the foremen or the more seasoned ones, the American dream should be reasonably within their grasp and attainable at your competitors or your contemporaries who do build entry-level products. So I don't like that. And I feel like that's the position that we're in right now. I truly believe that 2025 is going to be the hard push for reducing costs. I talked to tons of trade partners. I talked to builders. I read the builder reports. Builders are continuing to tell Wall Street they're going to reduce costs. They're going to get more efficient. It's just, as we talked about that, once you have a set of plans, in my opinion, all you're doing after that is squeezing margin from the trade partner. And if it's material, you're truly just squeezing margin because material prices are not going down. They then have to go back and ask their labor to reduce their rates. And I just don't like the sound of that. I don't think it's good for the industry as a whole. Sadly enough, there are some people who just like it's all just X's and O's and numbers. And it's not nefarious. It's just like we're driven. I've talked about this before. The Wall Street drive for growth. I want you to grow your revenue. I want you to grow your unit count, and I want you to grow your margin. And that's a tough thing to keep doing. And I think we're going to see it become more and more difficult. Now you may say, what about land? Why doesn't the land prices come down? Land prices do eventually come down, but I'm by no means a land expert, but most of the land act guys, the smart ones that I've talked to, guys and gals, they'll tell you that most of the land sellers, many of them, um, it's slow money. Like, and if it feels like they're being pinched, but they can sit on their property for another 5 years, they will. They don't want to leave money on the table for some of these. Some of them, this is their last hurrah, right? Maybe it's the family farm that they're going to sell, and this is going to get divvied up amongst 2, 3, 4, 5 siblings, and they want a certain amount for their nest egg for retirement. In some instances, they're master developers who've already basically they have a certain level of cost and development already sunk into that product. And so if their numbers need to go down, it's just margin compression for them as well. So, like I do think we're in for some interesting times, in the sense of, I think over the next 12 to 18 months, we're going to see revenue tracking and direct costs kind of not in line as much as they've historically been. We'll see. I could be wrong, and hopefully I'm wrong. There's a lot of different ways this can go. Like I said, if everything's tracking down, that's not good for our industry either. If everything's tracking up, that can be good, except we've got an affordability problem. So I believe what we need is stable revenues, stable enough to sort of get people comfortable. Lower interest rates would be wonderful, but that's out of all of our control. But we need stable to slightly declining revenue, not massively, slightly declining revenue. And then we need to put that together, in my opinion, with material cost decrease. So I'm going to start paying special attention to year-over-year margins of any of the public material manufacturers and suppliers that we can watch. Drywall, concrete, lumber, etc. Because I think where we really need to see some relief is in the material costs. Is it real? Is there a potential for real costs rather than margin compression cost reductions? I don't know. I'll have to do a little bit more digging into that, and I will. I'll commit to doing that over the second quarter. And that's where I think it needs to come from. And if that's from efficiencies or scale, something, because I don't like the idea of wages for tradespeople in the home building industry going down. I don't like that. And I don't want everything to come down from a price perspective. I like revenues to hold. I don't want revenues to go up too much because, like I said, the affordability is an issue. So we'll see. I'll commit to looking into the margins from material suppliers and manufacturers, because that'll be an interesting tell. But I think that's where there's some potential. Land prices would be good if they came down, and maybe I'm wrong on that. Hopefully we start to see some discounting there, because we need to. Some of the preliminary margins that some of the builders are reporting for Q1, I don't know. I hope they don't go down much more either. And like I've told everybody, if you only listen to one home builder earnings call a quarter, listen to Lennar's. They tend to have a strategy that they stick to. And so a couple things I would say on that is, if their strategy changes or their production pace changes, I think that's a big signal to the industry, whether it's up or down. And they tend to, if they keep their production pace and they keep doing what they say they're going to do, which is, figure out how to match sales to the production pace, all the other builders will just have to follow suit. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. I think we're in for some interesting times for the next 9 months, and maybe I think hopefully things will settle out by the end of the year, so that by the time we get into 2026, we're in more stable waters. But the interesting thing will be is, I believe there's a lot of bids for direct costs going out Q3 and Q4 of this year. And it'll be interesting to see how all this plays out with that. So with that, I'm going to stick to my commitment, and we're going to finish in under 15 minutes. I hope you enjoyed this episode and have an amazing day. We'll talk to you next week.
You're listening to The Builder's Mindset with Mike DiGiovanni, presented by Amazing Mindsets.